removing the perspective that we used to have about vocational training in this country is probably the most important thing to do to save the US job.
We are building learning profiles of students and then letting that inform the pedagogy, not the other way around.
One size does not fit all. Everyone has a different life, different expectations, and different ways of learning.
We need to find career happiness to have a better life.
Welcome to Better Careers, Better Lives, a show that features leaders in education, technology, and the skilled trade industries, and how they are making an impact in their respective fields by providing pathways to better careers and better lives. I'm your host, Doug Donovan, founder and CEO of Interplay Learning. On today's show, my guest is Asha Aravindakshan, author of Skills, the Common Denominator. Asha, thank you for coming today.
Doug, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. You have a new book out, Skills, the Common Denominator. First question, given the title, is there math in the book?
That is such a good question. People did have that connotation of math with the denominator, but no, there's no math unless you're trying to count how many skills you have based on the characters in the book.
Good, because if there's too much math, you'll definitely not get the readership you want. So yeah, tell me about it. Tell me, first of all, when do you wake up and say, I want to write a book? What was the motivation?
So 2 years ago, at the start of the pandemic, we saw 20% of the population lose their jobs due to companies collapsing or restructuring, and I just felt like I had to help. And so I used my knowledge on transferable skills, because I myself have pivoted from private sector to nonprofit sector to public sector in my career twice.
Yeah, twice, okay.
And so could I capture stories of people like me who have pivoted, made major pivots in their career, for the people who had lost their jobs who were going to need major changes.
Right.
So I started interviewing people in my network who had made dramatic shifts, and I was always curious, how did they do that? How did they go from being a guitarist to a corporate marketer, or a government, federal consultant to a social impact executive? There's even one person who was doing fundraising for schools, like a charter school, and now she does CSR for a bank.
Oh, wow.
But how do you do that?
Right,
and so I spent time with them a year ago. Actually, all these interviews happened in 2021. Asking them why they wanted to make a change, how they made the change, and most importantly, who helped them make that change.
Interesting.
Because what I found was it's people opening doors or spotting your skills that you realize you may not have and putting them in a different context helps you make that change.
Got it. All right. Well, obviously there's a list of things there. The why. Let's start with the why. Why are people, maybe you start with your own story. Why did you change, and why did you change 2 cycles worth? Yeah.
Right. So my changes were all facilitated by referrals and people in my network. They had an opportunity in their organization, and they're like, Asha could fix that problem. So they reached out, they presented a role. Sometimes they were writing the job description for the first time, and they said, you're the one that can do this. And sometimes I would be hesitant because I didn't know the industry or I didn't know what the organization did. But they said, no, we trust you to come in here and you'll figure it out. And that's what I did. And so I took a chance and a risk every time I made a switch, by trusting them that they would put me.
When you made those switches, were you discontented where you were? Was it a new challenge? What was the really the gut reason you'd make the move?
It's probably both have happened. There are times where it's just the opportunity is too good to pass up, and so I'm like, okay, I'm a place where I could leave this. Everything is documented. The team knows what they need to do. They can do this without me, and I can go on to the next role. There have been times where the transition has been up to 6 months, because I can't leave what I'm doing at that moment. Right. So it really is about the timing of the opportunity and the alignment to your goals and where you want to go.
Got it. So for you, the primary, sounds like, was just career growth.
Yes,
I want to build
absolutely.
New skills, new challenges, et cetera.
Right.
When you studied the other folks that you feature in the book, what were some of their primary goals?
So I think everybody wants a better life.
Yeah.
Right? So coming back to your better life, better careers, right?
Yes.
And so when I found that out, it was, how did they then pursue that better life? And some people set an intention, I want to be this, and it took 7 to 10 years to achieve that. But they were patient, they sought out opportunities on the side, to volunteer, or maybe, short-term gigs where they could leverage those skills that they wanted to be investing in 100% of their time until they got the role they wanted. For other people, they needed to do things like go to graduate school to facilitate that major change. Because graduate school provided the opportunity for internships, a whole new network, professors that could provide introductions to new companies. And so they plotted out how to incorporate that into what they were doing and made sure that they were intentional about making the change and doing it when it was right for them.
So if they're also doing it for career growth or a better life, how do they figure out what skills do I need, right? A lot of times you talk about, pretty dramatic shifts.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard from the outside looking in to know what skills. How do they identify those skills?
The perception of the skills that they have helps them know that they can use that in the next role. And like I said, sometimes it's also people from the outside telling them, you have these skills, you could do this, right? So even people, I have stories of people who've grown up within their companies, right? Within one woman's worked in the same company for 16 years, but she's had 5 career pivots. And that's because the executives in the company have learned to trust her, they find her dependable, and provided her with stretch opportunities to grow.
So at some level, you sort of start with a self-inventory?
Yes.
Like what skills do I have
That's
right now?
So going back to the math of the book.
Yep, see, there we go.
I have 42 skills in the book, and they're organized 3 skills for 14 characters.
Yeah.
And so as you read those character stories, and these stories have an average of 6 pivots each, you can say, that's me, or that's not me. And then when you see the skills at the end of the chapter, you can say, do I have these skills or do I not have these skills? Do I want these skills?
Got it.
Right.
And then with those skills, you probably some kind of gap analysis that says, geez, I don't have X, Y, or Z.
Well, that's really for the individual to take on their own, right? If there is that gap, then they could say, well, how did this person gain this skill in their story? Can I do the same? So I think it's really powerful to provide these examples and reference points because that's what people don't have. We're limited by our information.
Right.
And so the book kind of opens up this whole new world of people who have changed, again, these careers by industry, functional area, countries.
No kidding. So you do some gap analysis, and then obviously, depending on the path, you might have to go acquire skills. Are people financing this themselves? You talked about graduate school. Are they doing certificate programs? Are they doing volunteer? I'd love to hear how that actually works in practicality.
It's all of the above. Yeah. And so there's even just a chapter dedicated to networking because some people can't spend the money to go back to school, right? So how can they use their network to facilitate the change? And that may be by going to events with speakers and just meeting the speaker and creating a bond there. Volunteering or adult internships. I have a great example of someone who I helped get an adult internship when she was laid off from her job.
Oh, no kidding.
And she loved that opportunity because she works in marketing, and to go work in a marketing agency, she saw how the inside works. And now she knows, as she's back on the corporate marketing side, okay, now when I work with an agency, I understand how to talk to them and what to expect from them.
Right.
So that's another one. A podcast are another way to network. So someone who's really curious about a topic could start a podcast, invite people in their network or outside their network that they want to learn from, and have these conversations to really learn. It's almost like a self-taught course right there.
Yeah, your own graduate school.
Exactly. So I think the world is so open right now, and people are eager to connect. It's just a matter of how you will almost take advantage of that.
Yeah. We talked about, it sounds so easy the way we've sort of presented it here, but what are the major impediments? Like, obviously, most people don't do this as dramatic as you're suggesting. And there must be reasons. Tell me a little bit about some of the challenges.
I think the main challenge is the risk involved. And so it's funny because last night while I was here at the conference, I received an email from a friend who wants to start a new venture, but isn't sure if he should leave his corporate job.
Right.
And so I presented, I was like, hey, there's 3 scenarios that could happen here. Yeah. 1, you don't care about the risk and you have enough money in the bank that you can quit right now and start working on your venture, and you're disciplined enough to do all the milestones and keep yourself accountable.
Yeah.
Second scenario, you can take off the time, you can leave the company, but you're not disciplined in doing this on your own. So maybe join a job training program or an incubator to keep you accountable on what needs to be done. And then third scenario, you can't afford the risk. You need the paycheck every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So you keep the full-time job, but then you also do your gig as a side hustle. Maybe do one of these job skill training programs on the side to keep you accountable and at least get your idea off the ground. Because you feel like you're missing something. And so how can you find that fulfillment, right? And I think it's just it's hard for people to start because the risk gets in the way.
Yeah, I imagine inertia is probably the hardest thing to overcome. Even the term side hustle is something that's probably only, 6-8 years old.
That's right.
And you hear it, and obviously it must be a reflection of what's going on.
Absolutely. 3% of the workforce left voluntarily every month in the fall last year. That's continuing into this year. And so if these people are leaving their jobs, there's something else they want to do. They want that work-life balance. There's something they want to explore. And we have to be able to provide them with a space to do that.
Right. Obviously, when you read the articles and the statistics on the Great Resignation, you must read it with this, sort of more educated lens than most. What are some of the things you've seen in this broadly that are happening?
So one thing, even the people I interviewed last year, 25% of them have changed careers since I interviewed them.
No kidding.
So
Yeah.
I think once you start pivoting, you don't stop.
Yeah.
You continue to see opportunities. And I think the people that are leaving right now are seeing opportunities.
Yeah.
And they're seeing, especially since so many more companies are posting remote roles.
Right. That's obviously changed the opportunity level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then they're seeing that, oh my gosh, my skills and my talents can be used with this company on the other side of the country. That was not an option 2 years ago.
Right.
And that's kind of amazing. Or even around the world, right? There's some global companies also who don't care where the employees are based. And so I think that, and people are posting more on social media how they're finding their roles, when they're accepting these roles, and that loudness is definitely being heard by people.
That's interesting. I mean, obviously the labor shortage,
Yes.
which is also facilitates this, right? I would imagine, and you probably in your book don't study this historically. Historically, I would imagine this was more challenging. A tighter labor market probably doesn't give you that flexibility. Any sense on sort of where this fits in the cycles? And is this, one-time thing, or is this, something we're going to see for a long time?
I think as long as we continue to operate in a hybrid world, it's going to continue.
Yeah.
And so I actually, there's a chapter in the book I have called Advice for Employers.
Yeah.
And so I'm targeting and mostly small to medium-sized businesses who don't have resources, especially for recruiting. And I try to position them to say, why don't you go to the universities in your town and work with the career services offices to tap into students and alumni.
So this is, well, let me step back because a whole series of questions about employers, because I'm sitting here as an employer and I think, holy cow, I don't want my workforce jumping ship left and right. And obviously we work hard to try to make it a great place to work, in part to fight that potential.
Absolutely.
What can employers do to invest more in their own employees such that they don't lose them to somebody else?
I think the total rewards compensation benefits package has to be robust. Yeah. And so I know there's right now a whole social media movement, for example, on show us your leave, right?
What's show us your leave?
Show us your leave is started by Fairy Godboss. And so what they're encouraging employers to do is to show their benefits packages online.
Interesting.
And so if you just look up that hashtag, for example, on LinkedIn, there's over 200 posts from companies that are like, here's our leave package, here's our benefits package.
So that's about information, right?
Yes.
So going back to what you earlier said, you said some people don't have the information,
right.
or
and
once
so,
they do, it opens doors.
Exactly.
Same type of thing.
Exactly. So and a benefits package is something you would only get after you've gotten an offer letter somewhere.
Right.
You don't see that when you're examining the company. Maybe you'll find the values and the culture online, but not the benefits package. And so I think having a robust benefits package is important in order to stay competitive. One thing I've been learning here at South by Southwest EDU is companies are ensuring they have a really robust education benefits package. Right? They want the employees to be able to feel like they can take short course certification programs or perhaps do a part-time degree and reimburse for it.
Yeah.
And so that I think is something that can really set employers apart, especially because upskilling is so important right now.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And you see it with the guild educations of the world and the education as a benefit. So those are both, sometimes for outskilling, sometimes you're in a job sort of knowingly it's going to be 2 years or 3 and then you're moving on. But other times it's just about skill development inside of that company and career path.
Yes.
Let's dig in further on employers. Beyond, outskilling programs, certificate programs, like what do they do inside for career mapping and opportunity?
They have to have career pathways for their employees. If they hire an employee and they can't tell that employee from day one that you can go from role A to B to Z, they've already failed that employee. Because that employee is coming in with very high expectations about how that employer is going to support them in their career journey. And if they want them to stay, they need to be able to show them that lattice of opportunity of growth for within that company.
There's a term that became popular, I think out of the Silicon Valley crowd originally, and they talked about tour of duty inside of a company. Tell us a little bit about that concept.
So I remember reading about that in Ben Casnocha's book. And so he talks about within LinkedIn, they had tours of duty arranged, and they were really proud of that. And I was really excited when I read that when the book came out. And so I think if companies can arrange the career pathways to include tours of duty, for example, if you're a customer-facing person, put them in a role that's in a back office for a little bit so they understand, and vice versa. The back office person should understand what a customer-facing role is like. And when they have that experience of almost like job sharing in those tours of duty, they'll have more empathy for each other, and I think the company will hum a lot better when people have that empathy for each other.
Yeah, and that, it makes sense. Not many companies are set up to do that.
Right.
But to allow for that, you have to have a pretty good internal training program, right? To take a customer service facing person and put them on the back side of the house. You got to make sure you have good onboarding into those positions.
Good onboarding, documented procedures. And so there has to be, some way that you can find roles that people could do for weeks or months that allow them to do that. I know someone who works for a telecom company in the Caribbean, and they actually have one day where everyone in the headquarters office plays the role of a support agent. And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And so I think there are these opportunities where, imagine a customer calls in and Doug answers the phone.
Right.
I mean, how caught off guard would they be, but also pleasantly surprised?
Yes.
Right?
I think I should do that. I think that's a
I want to hear how that goes.
Right. What about demographics? Do we, I don't know if you had, how much research you've done that. I'd be curious to know, is this something that only the high salary positions can afford to do? Are you seeing it at all levels?
Doug, that's a really good question. Yeah. And so I had a lot of trouble finding people at all socioeconomic statuses to interview for the book. I had to push really hard on my network to find diverse stories.
Yeah.
And so I think there is an access problem there, but it's also that the people at lower socioeconomic statuses don't have the examples.
Yeah, so they don't have a model of a successful career switch.
That's right.
They've got it. And I would imagine sometimes they don't have the information, the access to the information.
Right, and so then maybe they're in a public school system where the guidance counselors are strapped for time, so they're also not presenting all the career options for them.
Right.
They're presenting what they think is best for the student and may not understand the student from a 360 perspective. So I think it starts at a really young age. I've given book talks from middle school students to mid-career executives. And you know who's the most excited? It's the middle school students.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're so pumped when I present examples from the book and I show them, you can talk about yourself in different ways, like storytelling is really important.
Right.
And they get really excited because they're like, wow, this is how I can position myself. I not only want to do A, I want to do B also.
Right,
and then I teach them how to network and they're like, okay, so now I go ask people for help. I can ask them, can you help me with someone who does A or B?
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to them. And so they're finding that so useful. So I think starting at a really early age and presenting these examples, talking about the work that we're doing and skills and not just like the functional topics that they're learning in school, but start to shift the conversation.
Start thinking about transferable skills as early 6th, 7th, 8th grade.
Yes.
Interestingly, we had a guest recently on the podcast from ASA whose focus is on career navigation and career information down to 6th grade. And they said 6th to 9th grade or so, people start closing doors. Oh, I could never do that. Oh, I could never do that. And so, it's really interesting. You're also presenting them this idea that you have a winding career ahead of you, so keep your eyes open.
Exactly, and I learned of ASA also at South by Southwest EDU, and I was pleasantly surprised to know that they've been doing the research for a long time and understanding that middle school is the right inflection point for the career pathway conversation. So I'm eager to dig in more into what they have found, but I'm seeing it real time in the presentations that I'm giving and seeing these kids' faces light up with the possibility.
Is there any, and this might go beyond the scope of what you covered, is there anything you've seen now you say, geez, policy-wise, we got to do X, Y, or Z, or schools need to invest more in a certain way? What are some of your learnings around this?
I was in a session at the South by Southwest EDU conference where they were talking just about this, and it was so interesting because there are no policies around career readiness or career pathways for schools, and schools are doing what they want on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah.
So consistency there could really help, and even if it's baseline consistency, to have career pathway conversations, again, as early as middle school, just be like, hey, even if it's a check the box, that'll shift the conversation in such a major way for young people.
Yeah.
And so I hope that the folks in these organizations that are advocating for youth and career readiness can convince legislators to make this happen, at least in this administration or the next.
Yeah, that makes sense. We hear a lot of anecdotal stories about there being more flexibility and openness to different paths, meaning, it used to be four-year college, get a degree. It feels like, our company focuses on skilled trades, and it feels like there's a lot more acceptance as that as a really viable career and financially rewarding career path. Have you seen that or heard that in your studies?
I actually am seeing it right now, and people are sharing job descriptions with me where the job description says, if you don't meet 50% of the qualifications, please still apply.
Oh, no kidding.
I've seen 3 companies now that have phrases like that, and I can even read 1 or 2 to you here. If you don't meet 100% of the above qualifications, you should still seriously consider applying. Studies show that you can still be considered for a role if you meet just 50% of the role's requirements.
Wow.
And that came from Webflow.
Yeah.
So kudos to Webflow for
Right.
putting that in the job description so people will see that and understand they should still apply.
So saying like that job description up above might have said bachelor degree.
Exactly.
Encouraged or bachelor's degree,
Right.
and someone might just shut that down and say, well, I don't have a bachelor's, I'm out.
It'll say degree requirements. It'll say you should have functional area requirements for marketing, operations, technology, whatever. And if you don't check those boxes,
Yeah.
you may opt out at that point. It may
Right.
say you have to be a people manager. You may be a people manager or leader in your volunteer activities. That shouldn't preclude you from a job with those responsibilities. It's up to you to demonstrate that in an interview.
Right, interesting. When you looked at this, did you see difference in between genders, where it's like, historically men have been more willing to, less risk averse?
Yes.
And, what did you find?
When I just looked in my network of LinkedIn connections and I like, oh, this person has a really interesting career, it was predominantly white men.
Yeah.
And so I think there is the access to opportunity is more for them than it is for other people. But that's why I worked really hard to find people who represented different ages, races, genders, socioeconomic statuses to show like this is possible, because we need to present the example so people understand they have opportunity.
Got it. And we're going back to sort of the beginning of this conversation, but when you wrote this book, is the vision that 19-year-old, that 29-year-old or 39-year-old
right.
picks it up? Is it for the individual? Is it for the employer? Like, who's your primary audience?
It's both. So I like to say like the target audience is anyone from 16 to 66.
Okay.
And
All
so
right.
because you could pick it up, for example, as a high school student and position yourself for your college applications through the stories that you're reading, right? And then when you're in college, you're like, well, how do I get that internship? I need to network.
Yeah.
Teaches you how to do that. You graduate and you're starting your career, you realize maybe you picked the wrong first job.
Yeah.
That's okay, right? Their
Everyone
stories are
picked
there.
the wrong first job.
Exactly. There's no silver bullet there.
That's right.
And then when you're later in life, if you want to switch or restart your career, the examples are there. And I've written the book in a way where the chapters almost stand alone.
Yeah.
So you can go back and be like, I want to reread Justin's story or Lauren's story or Jonathan's story, and it's there and you can go back and pick it up. The second part of the book, the how-to, is really about personal branding. Like we said, personal branding changes over time.
Right.
And so you want to come back to that chapter over and over again to be like, is what I'm putting out there still representative of what I can do, what my skills are?
And you've identified, I think you said 42
Yes.
skills, and I can imagine, somebody working a worksheet a little
Right.
bit. And,
Yeah, exactly.
And so really practical for a reader.
Yes, totally practical. It's very I know you don't know me for long, but I'm very practical, very actionable, and the book is the same way. So you read the stories, you kind of get engrossed in the stories in the first part, and then you're ready to put into action in the second part. And so on the part for employers, I want hiring managers and recruiters to read this book, and I want them to open their eyes to what's possible when they're hiring candidates. That they need to keep an open mind. And so that very last chapter is called Advice for Employers, and I interview the executive director of the National Association of Colleges and Employers, plus 2 career services offices. And I put in there, we're in this market right now where virtual recruiting and hybrid recruiting is here to stay for at least a few more semesters at school. Take advantage of that to find the best talent that fits the organization.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Just
that
keep an
makes a
open
lot of
mind.
sense.
And that these career services offices can really serve as an extension of your team to finding you really good talent. They're almost like warm referrals when they present them to you.
Right.
And so if you have a very small recruiting team or they're strapped for time, see them as a way to amplify the work that needs to be done and just bring in the best people.
Yeah, really interesting. So, at Interplay, our mission every day is better careers, better lives. And our thesis is better careers lead to better lives,
Absolutely.
right? Simple as that.
Yes.
But it's also a thesis, right? In your studies, did you find, does that align with what you found?
100%. The book could be called Better Careers, Better Lives.
Yeah.
It's so aligned. I think, the last 2 years of the pandemic showed us like how intertwined our careers and our lives can be. And we need to find career happiness to have a better life.
Fantastic. Well, Asha, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. The book's called Skills, the Common Denominator. Where can a listener or watcher find it?
Your audience can find the book on Amazon, Goodreads, and Barnes & Noble. There's the ebook, paperback, and the hardcover is now available. And I'll have the audiobook ready in a few months.
All right. Well, congratulations. It's really exciting. We're excited to be a part of it. We're excited to promote it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug.
Better careers, better lives.